Welcome to the Providence College Podcast. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Google Play. If you like what you hear, please review and share with others. Email podcast@providence.edu with questions or comments. Go Friars!
Hello and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Chittum, and I'm joined as always by PC producer and videographer Chris Judge. In this episode of the PC Podcast, we are continuing our theme of Christmas, this time with a lecture from Associate Professor of English Elizabeth Bridgham, presenting a paper titled Caroling Again and Again, a Christmas Carol in Repertory. Dr. Bridgham investigates the appeal of seeing a Christmas carol performed live in a theater year after year. Enjoy.
I'd like to preface my talk today by saying a few words about its origins because it really arises from my experience with students here at Providence College. I often ask my 19th century novel students and students in my Dickens seminars about their prior experiences with Dickens's works, kind of see where they're coming into it, how they're approaching Dickens, what they know already. And over, students tell me, I love A Christmas Carol. My family goes to see it performed at the theater every year. And I have to admit, even though I studied Dickens for love and money, my internal response has been surprise and a little bit of skepticism. Really? Every year? Doesn't it get old? Doesn't it get expensive? I mean, ticket prices averaging around $60. This is a real investment, both of time and money. So this paper comes from my genuine curiosity about and desire to investigate the enduring appeal of A Christmas Carol, not as a story, I don't need any convincing about that, nor as a modern myth, and nor even as a movie, because who doesn't love rewatching your favorite version of A Christmas Carol while you're wrapping presents and sipping cocoa? But I really wanted to figure out what is it about A Christmas Carol that endures as a specifically live theatrical experience. Scrooge's story is pretty much a story about theater. Let me explain. Scrooge in this story becomes like us, watching his life as if it were a theatrical experience. And like any good theater, it's a very provocative story he gets to witness. It challenges his very foundations, and it gets him to change. He is transformed, which is what any good theater can do with an audience. This is what theater director Mark J. Lerman had to say in 1999 when asked by the Providence Journal about the relationship between Trinity Repertory Theater's adaptation of A Christmas Carol and Dickens's original 1843 story. Trinity Rep has made a tradition of performing A Christmas Carol every holiday season, beginning in early November and running through the new year since 1976. It is not alone. Every year, theatrical companies all around the world mount repeat productions of the carol and perform to audiences filled with people who have seen the show before. Today, I will use the example of Providence, Rhode Island's Trinity Repertory Theater to consider the enduring popularity of A Christmas Carol as an annual theatrical tradition. To my knowledge, Dickens's story is the only theatrical adaptation, indeed the only play, to be mounted each year by the same theatrical companies. In fact, in Rhode Island, there are competing carols. In addition to Trinity's major Providence production, this is a poster from the Trinity Rep production this year. There's the Stadium Theater in Woonsocket, the Artists Exchange in Cranston, and several high schools that also perform adaptations of the story. All of these theaters are within a 40-minute drive of one another. Given what seems to be the cultural saturation of A Christmas Carol, and indeed the market saturation of these theatrical performances, how are companies like Trinity Rep to set themselves apart? How can they innovate each year while remaining faithful to Dickens's original story? How can they surprise repeat audiences without alienating traditionalists? Trinity Rep is a nationally recognized regional theater, distinguished in its own right and as a launching pad for major theatrical careers. For example, its former artistic director, Oscar Eustis, is now the artistic director of the Public Theater in New York City, which was instrumental in bringing a little musical you might have heard of called Hamilton to the stage. So you can kind of see Trinity's not such a small deal. Trinity's company has presented world premieres of plays by such playwrights as Paula Vogel, Tony Kushner, and Sarah Ruhl, and is constantly eager to engage with such challenging and often experimental works. Yet A Christmas Carol is Trinity's most popular show, and also its most expensive. According to Assistant Artistic Director Tyler Dabrowski, the Carol costs about $600,000 to produce, as opposed to most of the other plays in a season, which cost around $250,000, and it brings in about $1 million in ticket sales. Tickets run from $25 to $100 a piece. When I asked him whether there's any interaction between a given year's Carol and the more boundary-pushing dramas in a season, Dabrowski candidly said no. The Carol stands apart from the rest of the season, both creatively and, for the most part, financially. While A Christmas Carol brings in enough money to cover its own costs, and some besides, it is not enough to bankroll the theater's other plays. In the course of the same interview, Dabrowski explained that you want to be challenging, but you want to be commercial too. And that A Christmas Carol is a gift to the community. This tension between the carol as a commodity and a gift, between a challenge and a comfort, is surely one that Dickens himself would appreciate, even given his discomfort with theatrical adaptations of his own works. At this point, it might be useful to play the role of the ghost of Christmas past and say a bit about the history of A Christmas Carol on the stage. As literary critic Fred Guida explains, the Carol has always been more than just a book. It's an integral part of our collective consciousness and always has been. The alternate means of dissemination may have changed over the past 160 years, but long before the appearance of the first roll of cellulose nitrate film or the first cathode ray tube, the Carol was finding a way to reach a large segment of the population that could neither read nor afford to buy the book. Each of Dickens's pre-Carol novels had been adapted for the stage, sometimes before their serial publication runs had been completed. That is, versions of the Pickwick Papers, that's a tongue twister, Pickwick Papers, Oliver Twist, and Nicholas Nickleby were being performed to popular audiences before the author had finished writing them. So, Game of Thrones fans, there's a precedent, right? This has always been going on. Dickens lacked in his lifetime the kind of copyright protections for his work that exist today, so each of his works was subject to piracy, both in print and on stage. And just months after A Christmas Carol's 1843 publication, in February 1844, 8 different London theaters premiered adaptations. None of these productions was sanctioned by Dickens, though he did damn one, Edward Sterling's A Christmas Carol, with faint praise, calling it better than usual, but heartbreaking to me. Oh heaven, said Dickens, if any forecast of this was ever in my mind. Yet O. Smith, as Scrooge, was drearily better than I expected. Dickens had nothing against the theater, nor against popularization. He was an amateur actor and he wrote plays himself, and he hoped that works like The Carol would reach mass audiences. He did, however, object to vulgarized versions from which he received little or no financial compensation. As an antidote to these, and as a way to regain control of the Carol and to reach audiences directly, Dickens himself began a series of highly popular public readings of the Carol in 1853, which he performed for charity and professionally throughout the 1850s and 1860s. And this is an image of him actually giving a reading of the Christmas Carol in 1869. Each reading was, in fact, a one-man dramatic performance, with Dickens bringing each character to life via a skillful blending of vocal characterization and physical expression. Since these initial productions, the Carol's theatrical popularity has waxed and waned, until steadily increasing in the years since World War II and spiking in the 1970s, with what Guida calls an avalanche of theatrical carols that has continued to the present day. Let's return then to the present, a difficult task in some ways for repertory theaters considering what to do with each new production. The commercial practicalities of staging A Christmas Carol are necessarily backward-looking. Audiences for this play crave tradition, and theatrical companies flout this desire at their peril. Not only is the success of a current production year at stake, so is that of the next season's production. As Trinity Rep's graphic designer and archivist Michael Guy puts it, you're always selling last year's Carol. Trinity's version of last year harkens back to 1980, the copyright year for the theater's house script, adapted from Dickens by Adrian Hall and Richard Cumming. Directors can, however, make changes to this script, which itself preserves much of Dickens's language, but which adds a musical introduction that shows Scrooge interacting with Marley before Marley's death, and incorporates some additional characters, like a Mrs. Partlet, who serves as Scrooge's crusty housekeeper. Mrs. Partlet is not in Dickens's original text. When artistic director Kurt Columbus returned to Dickens's original text for the 2015 production, the Providence Journal, in its review, called attention to the fact that, not finding any reference to Mrs. Partlet, he gave her the boot. I find this small detail from the local newspaper's review telling in its approach to the play. Channing Gray, the reviewer, has weighed in on the Carol productions for many years now, to the point where in his reviews, the Hall and Cumming script, and not Dickens's original book, has become the urtext. In returning to Dickens, he seems to see Columbus not restoring a more authentic version of the story, but heartlessly axing a beloved comic character. The fact that he comments on this in the second paragraph of his short review suggests that not only he, but also his readers and Trinity's audiences will expect to see Mrs. Partlet and will be disappointed. The Journal and Trinity Rep audience also have long memories and will take the theater to task for its failures to meet their expectations. Dabrowski explained to me the 4 non-negotiable requirements to meet the audience's idea of a traditional Carol: London, snow, British accents, and flying. Gotta have the flying. Kirk Columbus tells the story of the audience reaction to his 2005 production of The Carol, his first as artistic director and his first time directing the play. Columbus had mounted a visually gorgeous production, complete with life-size papier-mâché puppets and a fantastical carnival theme for the ghostly visitations. Here's the ghost of Christmas past. Here's the ghost of Christmas future, as realized by these enormous puppets. However, he had eliminated one of the sacred 4 elements of tradition. There was no snow in this production. One day, Columbus was shopping at Eastside Marketplace, an upscale Whole Foodsy independent grocery here in Providence. He was approached by an elderly lady who had just seen The Carol. Eager for her feedback, and probably anticipating compliments, Columbus was shocked to hear her say, loudly enough for most of the shoppers to hear, "In A Christmas Carol, it has to effing snow." She didn't say effing. So, you know. She was not alone in her critique. The Providence Journal also missed the snow, and 10 years later, in the same review that commented on the absence of Mrs. Partlet, Channing Gray remarked, "Columbus, who got scolded for not having snow when he directed the show a decade ago, made sure there was a smattering Christmas morning when Damola Adebayo, the beloved turkey boy, trudges off to buy the prize turkey for the Cratchits' Christmas dinner." Paul Davis argues that A Christmas Carol could be said to have 2 texts, the one that Dickens wrote in 1843, and the one that we all collectively remember. He calls the latter a culture text, the sum of all its versions, of all its revisions, parodies, and piracies. Deborah Vlock adds on to this, coining the term imaginary text to describe a reading space located outside the actual narrative embodiments of Victorian novels and inside the field of socio-dramatic possibilities established by popular entertainments. She considers the way in which multiple cultural versions, films, theatrical adaptations, cartoons, comic books, etc., of Dickens' stories affect and alter our readings of the original texts. While I certainly agree that Scrooge and his story have become a modern myth that stretches far beyond the pages of Dickens' original text, and that this myth influences how we read and understand Dickens, The examples I've just mentioned of Trinity Rep's repeated stagings of A Christmas Carol suggest a third, and specifically local, way to understand how the carol occupies the cultural imagination. Because, as Dabrowski puts it, the bones of the Trinity adaptation stay the same from year to year, audience to audience. Rhode Island theatergoers have their own version of Scrooge and the Carol in mind that is neither identical with Dickens's text nor with the cultural amalgamation that we get collectively from such widely available film sources as The Muppets, Mr. Magoo, Alastair Sim, George C. Scott, Bill Murray, name your favorite adaptation here. And if this is true at Trinity, then it must also be true for audiences at the Guthrie in Minneapolis, of the Goodman in Chicago, of the McCarter in Princeton, and of countless other repertory theaters, each of which repeatedly uses its own fresh interpretation of the story. There are several versions of the Carol myth, then. Some are universal, and some are very regional indeed. Now, none of this is to say that Trinity Rep does not change its productions each year. Indeed, so long as it does not violate the 4 essential traditional elements, once again, these are London, British accents, flying, and snow. And as long as they keep fairly close to the Hall and Cumming script, some experimentation and change is essential. After all, the theater relies on repeat local audiences who would be unlikely to invest on average $63 per ticket to see exactly the same production every year. Trinity engages in non-traditional and color-conscious casting. Its Scrooges have been female and male, black and white. This image shows a Trinity stalwart, Barbara Meek, in the role of Scrooge. There's a reader character in the Trinity script. Sometimes this is a small child who finds the book of A Christmas Carol and frames the tale. Sometimes this is an actor playing Dickens himself. But most intriguing to me are the visual and conceptual adaptations, which change each year. These changes in the adaptation both help to prevent carol fatigue among the members of the company. Some of the actors have played all the roles, including Turkey Boy. And they allow different directors to put their own stamps on their productions. Trinity often brings in outside directors, including recent MFA graduates from Brown University, who sometimes apprentice the director of the preceding season before taking the helm, thus allowing for continuity and innovation in the productions. Sometimes the concept of the year is evident to the audience, as in the very locally appropriate Rhode Island Carol, in which key elements of the set and incidental allusions referenced landmarks around Providence and around the state. And sometimes the concepts are evident only to the director and artistic director, as in the case of the 4 Elements Carol, where each ghost visually represented earth, wind, fire, and water. And just as a side note, I was told about that 4 Elements production by the artistic director of Trinity Rep, and I went around looking for images of it and asking the graphic designer and asking people on the crew about that production. Nobody had any idea what I was talking about. Only the artistic director knew that that was supposed to be about the 4 Elements, apparently. Oscar Eustis described the 1998 Rhode Island Carol as an attempt to collapse the distinction between the world in the theater and the world outside. This speaks to the community-mindedness of Trinity Rep's productions. In this case, the goal was not only to modernize the carol, but also to personalize it to the Rhode Island experience. And here you see an image of the playbill surrounded by the local landmarks that it references. So we see in the upper right-hand corner the Rhode Island State House, flanked by the dancing traffic cop. You see an actual picture of him up there to the right. The Quahogs in the lower left-hand corner. Ghost of Christmas Present is resting his foot on the Quahogs. We have the Superman building. We have the big blue bug as well. Director Neil Barron explained, we've tried to turn the tale just a few degrees, not so much as to take away what is familiar and powerful in the original story, but just enough so that we all listen to it with our full attention once again. And to achieve this end, Barron set the story not in London. He was living dangerously, breaking the rules, but in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, a birthplace of the Industrial Revolution in America. The production elicited knowing smiles from its local audience by building in very culturally specific references to the Rhode Island landmarks that you see before you there. We even see an image down in the lower right-hand corner of a Rhode Island, New York system wiener, which is no doubt the source of the blot of mustard that Scrooge accuses of provoking his vision of Marley early in Dickens's Carol. Fezziwig's idealized warehouse is transformed to Fezbro. Both the name and the font used to display it in the set design allude to Hasbro, the Rhode Island-based toy maker and philanthropic organization that funds a children's hospital, a major playground, and other children's services throughout the state. By increasing the immediacy of the carol to the surroundings of its audience, Eustace and Barron hoped to make the audience still more aware of the continuing urgency of Dickens's story. The following year, 1999, was one in which the director, Mark Lerman, sought to make the audience aware of the story's very theatricality by staging the carol as a vaudeville production. Instead of traditional sets, the production was staged in front of curtains and two-dimensional backdrops. You see an image there. All of the apparatus is exposed. And Providence Journal critic Bill Gale described the visual experience thus: "There are medieval devils a la Hieronymus Bosch, and then a long scene in which Waiting for Godot seems to meet the painter Magritte as a sepulchral, white-clad ghost directs Scrooge amid a tour de Trinity of bicycles." This may suggest a muddled visual sensibility, to be sure, but the overall Brechtian meta-theatricality of the production creates a tension between exposing the artificiality of the production and encouraging the audience's identification with Scrooge, who is, indeed, in the carol, the audience for the spectacle of his own life. Other recent concepts include the 2011 production, which taps into the popularity of television's Mad Men by imagining Scrooge born in the 1890s and the present day of the story to be in the 1950s. Another image from that. And then there's the 2008 carol, in which the ghosts were inspired by Japanese horror films like Ringu and The Grudge, and which seems to me to push the family-friendly nature of the Trinity tradition a little bit far. Just for a point of reference, even in the very traditional Victorian 2015 staging of the carol, parents of crying toddlers were beating hasty retreats up the aisle when Marley's ghost appeared, so I can only imagine what happened when this came flying out of the wall. Still, the concept of this production, designed to display the truly terrifying consequences of living as Scrooge and Marley had done, was quite visually chilling, particularly in the fact that the actor playing Tiny Tim also portrayed the ghost of Christmas future, pointing out to Scrooge what his own awful fate might be. This casting choice creates a striking continuity among the plight of Tiny Tim, the dark future of the fourth ghostly visitation, and the ghastly but often forgotten figures of ignorance and want that cling about the skirts of the ghost of Christmas present in Dickens's original story. These terrifying children, central to Dickens's social criticism in the carol, are often forgotten in the popular carol myth that we associate with cozy comfort and Christmas joy. Dickens describes them thus: "They were a boy and girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility, where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints. A stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade through all the mysteries of wonderful creation has monsters half so horrible and dread." The ghost of Christmas present warns Scrooge and us, this boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both and all of their degree. But most of all, beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. The visual association in Trinity's horror film production of the carol of Tiny Tim with the most terrifying figures in the story perhaps heightens the sense of relief when, order restored and happy ending attained, Scrooge hoists the living Tiny Tim on his shoulders. All of these adjustments to Dickens's original setting and tale achieve, it seems, the effect of bringing contemporary audiences closer to the story, whether by catering to their experience as Rhode Islanders, as spectators, or to their other tastes and viewing habits, horror films, Mad Men. And this move on the part of the Repertory Company strives to prevent A Christmas Carol from being mere holiday escapism. The world outside is always brought into the theater. And this is particularly evident in one further element of Trinity's production and in that of numerous other theaters that staged the carol, which is community outreach. For the past 8 years, Trinity Rep has operated in partnership with the Rhode Island Community Food Bank, raising $25,000 to $40,000 for the food bank each year, over $250,000 total so far. As Dabrowski puts it, it's a natural partnership for a play like A Christmas Carol, so much so that the drive for donations is initiated by the cast itself. The actor playing Scrooge makes an announcement praising the work of the food bank at the end of each performance, asking the audience to contribute. And the other actors then pass the hats, top hats, of course, through the audience to collect donations. This neat and effective touch extends Scrooge's response to the philanthropic gentleman that he rejects at the beginning of Dickens's story, and to whom he generously donates at the end. Dickens, if we are to be like Scrooge, if Dickens's story, theatrically realized, is to have had its effect on us, then we too need to contribute cheerfully and generously. The numbers suggest that Trinity's repeated performances do indeed achieve this effect, and that A Christmas Carol, even when repeated year after year, remains a transformative theatrical experience. So, thank you. Happy holidays.